the level of enthusiasm that's out there.
It does. And, it's also important to note that because this is a newly public company, there's not a lot of analyst coverage yet.
Right.
So it's really hard to say with any certainty what the future holds.
Yeah, but what we can say is that, there's strong momentum.
Yeah.
And the expectation is for continued volatility.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that volatility is typical for newly public companies.
Yeah.
The market is trying to figure out what the fair value is. And, there's a lot of price discovery that goes on in those early days.
Right. And it seems like in this particular case, the market sentiment and the enthusiasm for this type of media is really driving the price.
Absolutely. And, that's something that's really important for investors to understand is that, the story, the narrative around a company can be just as important as the fundamentals in the early days.
And we're definitely seeing that play out with NewsMax.
Absolutely.
So let's move on to our final company for today.
Okay.
RSLS, Reshape Life Sciences.
All right.
Now, this is another one that had a really big jump on April 1st.
Oh, what?
It went up 341%.
Oh, my goodness.
It went from 39 cents all the way up to $1.59.
That's incredible.
And over the last 2 weeks, it's up 148%.
So a huge move there.
Yeah, a huge move.
And, I'm curious to kind of understand, what's driving that.
Yeah, and it looks like, one of the things that's driving it is that they got a really important patent allowance back on March 10th.
Okay.
And this is for their diabetes and neuromodulation technology.
And this is a big deal because diabetes is a huge market.
Right.
And, any new technology that can help to address that, it's going to generate a lot of interest.
And, that patent protection goes all the way to 2039.
Wow. So they've got a long runway there.
Yeah. So that could be a big part of why investors are excited about this company.
Yeah, it's definitely something to be excited about.
Yeah.
And I think, when we see this kind of move in the stock price, it's really important to kind of, zoom out and look at the bigger picture.
Right.
And say, okay, is this just a short-term pump?
Right.
Or is there something more fundamental going on here?
Right. And, in this case, it looks like there could be both.
Yeah.
You've got the short-term speculation, but you've also got this really important patent that could be, driving long-term value.
And that's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah.
Because, you've got those two forces kind of, pulling in different directions.
Right.
And it's really up to investors to kind of, do their own research and decide, which force they think is going to win out.
And, we actually have a really helpful summary table.
Oh, okay.
That has a lot of the information that we've been talking about today, laid out in a really easy-to-read format.
And this is great because, it allows us to kind of compare